welcome to everyone who's attending today. If you found us through Eventbrite or have been a longtime viewer and subscribed to our newsletter, welcome. Glad to see you here. My name is Philip Stinnes. I am the manager of the Cal State Fullerton Startup Incubator. We've started this incubator about 9 years ago, going on about 10, and work with about 100 different startups. And what we do is we help people in the early phase of their business. I call it like the napkin phase of the idea, but we've also helped out people go from that napkin phase all the way through to raising funds. And so we can help you in all those steps, but building the MVP, the minimum viable product, getting it up to launch, that's kind of our specialty. And we use a lean startup approach. I can talk to you more about it. I'll put it in the chat a little bit more about our incubator. I do have another little announcement for the students that are attending. Please direct message me your campus-wide ID as well as the class that you're in. I'm looking for the times and if it's a 465A or B. And with that, why don't I go ahead and hand over to Travis. Travis, why don't you introduce our speakers and kind of take it from here?
Awesome. Thank you very much, Philip. And again, anybody who's a student for extra credit, make sure just to direct message Philip with your CWID, and he'll get that all taken care of. Today, we have Stanley Bishop in to talk about AI. And so Stanley is currently the head of AI at Youthink Academy. Stanley also holds the title of machine learning scientist, at Stanford, and serves as the lead architect of NewAtlantis Labs. His journey has seen him designing multi-GPU deep learning clusters for natural language processing, NLP, at Google, and specializing in scientific foundation large language models. Those are the LLMs that you, as a student, may or may not be familiar with, and that's at Stanford Genetics. Renowned for his groundbreaking work in AI and machine learning, Stanley is passionate about demystifying AI and helping people harness its power. His dedication to equipping students with essential AI skills is evident in every endeavor he undertakes. And, just advancing that, he is here today, gracious enough to talk with us. And so, Stanley, I'll hand it over to you. We've got about 55 minutes left. So tell us all that is to be known about AI and how people can use it to start their businesses or anything else.
Heck yeah. Sounds so good. Quite frankly, have trouble shutting my mouth about these topics. So I think it'll be a blast. And if we want to get some questions going, will be so much fun. But I love that I am talking to an incubator that starts at the napkin phase. I think that's so beautiful. And I think that's when the puzzle of a product is really the most fun, isn't it? Before all these different dimensions of reality intrude. But yeah, kind of going from the napkin to reality is what I'm so passionate about. And I'm so excited to talk about that and talk about Youthink and what we do at Youthink. And also, quite frankly, I have a little bit of a fun narrative where I want to share some of my biggest mistakes as an entrepreneur in the deep learning space, because I do think that is where we learn. So without further ado, let me see if I can share my screen. And can you guys see my slides right now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, let me do the full screen and then just make sure. Wait, that's not the right button. All right, we good to go? We looking good?
Looks good to me.
All right, so unlocking the future with artificial intelligence, and I'm here representing Youthink. Youthink is an enablement company. We're looking to train the workforce that is needed for the generative AI revolution. We work with students in all kinds of different contexts, and our goal is to take people all the way from just hearing about AI, messing with it a little bit, up to potentially coding and deploying their own models. And so it's very, very exciting. Really feels like a pretty unique educational opportunity to be part of training this new workforce. Introduction to me, I think you covered it though. Quite frankly, I feel good if I'm able to get a computer to turn on and do something. So all this fancy stuff, I'm not so sure about that. But do really love these subjects, the subjects of artificial intelligence and machine learning. Um, what is artificial intelligence and machine learning? Is kind of a funny question. In the time that I've been working in the space, we started out calling the field artificial intelligence. This was maybe 12 years ago. It was believed that artificial intelligence at that point was an overpromise. So we started calling it statistical learning, which eventually became machine learning. And I genuinely think it's just because that sounds a little cooler. Um, Machine learning traditionally, up until the advent of transformer models, was a pretty limited field. Like, these things weren't really systems that you would look at and say they were intelligent. They often did things that were functionally positive, and so there were machine learning systems that were parts of products. But yeah, it wasn't until the recent transformer revolution that we really got to where we are now, which is just massive disruption. It used to kind of feel like for a given product, building a machine learning system that would, support the product was really like a process of shoehorning. We really had to line up just all the factors to get something that kind of worked. And it's so different now. It almost feels like when looking at a product, when looking at a company, you're almost overwhelmed by all of the different ways you could introduce AI. For example, a retailer can generate marketing. They can now have AI chatbots interact with their customers as part of their customer service operations. LLMs can be doing code, writing copy. Really, there isn't a vertical of a startup that doesn't have the potential to be accelerated with generative AI. And so it's now a whole new thing, like figuring out where to target your resources when applying generative AI. Think actually this slide I mostly covered in the last slide. And what's driving all this? It's something called large language models. And actually going to talk a little bit more in detail coming up about what large language models are, where they come from. But the big punchline of large language models is that they are an unsupervised learner, meaning that when you give them data, they learn from the data without any further instruction. Traditionally, you might have had to do what is called data set annotation to train a model, where that means you're kind of like looking through photos and labeling what the photos are. Like this is a cow, this is a horse. That obviously limits the scope of the training. So yeah, transformers, large language models, really transformative. And as mentioned, applicable in almost any different dimension of a business. Some big challenges though, with the data in terms of the privacy, with the cost of the compute, and with finding the talent, right? Like we said, we're sort of training students and getting them into these new positions as fast as we can, and there's a lot of others doing it, but the demand for people who know how to build these products and navigate the design of these products is still very hard. And this brings me to the thing that I'm most excited to talk about and to share, which is just actually a little bit of my story as a builder and someone who works on startups. And started with this thing. My grandpa told me, a wise man sees failure as progress. For those of you who follow entrepreneurial thinkers, I'm sure you've seen this before. People talk about failing quickly, right? Trying to fail, learning from failures. Sam Altman has some great discourse that maybe some people have seen about, the main factor that he sees in successful founders is perseverance. But yeah, not just perseverance, not just beating your head against the wall, but learning from that, right? So this is a thing that more than anything, I would like to leave you guys with as entrepreneurs, especially entrepreneurs who are, interested in navigating this complex moment. Be excited about failure. Be willing to fail and be ready to learn from your failures. And from a narrative perspective, though, oh, this is not the right video, actually. Oh, Kira, this is actually not the right video. Shoot. Oh, all right, guys. I'm so sorry. I had a little video to share. I'll see if I can find it, and maybe we can look at it at the end of the talk. But yeah, forgive me for that. I was going to share a video of the 2014 keynote for the NVIDIA GTC conference. This was given by a famous machine learning scientist named Andrew Yang. Has actually a very famous machine learning course out of Stanford that most people have taken. Also is the founder of Coursera. And I was so excited and lucky to be in the audience for Dr. Yang's keynote. And in his keynote, he shared a very interesting and very prescient story that machine learning is going through a process where originally machine learning systems were trained and run on CPUs. Then we realized that if we ran them on GPUs, we could run them much, much faster. Then we realized if we could run machine learning models on many, 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 many different CPUs in the cloud, they would work even faster. And then in this moment, 2014, when Dr. Yang was delivering this keynote, we had maybe the first year or two of the technology that is currently transforming the world, multi-internode cloud-based GPU computing. So mouthful, but what it means is running machine learning models on a large number of GPUs hooked together in the cloud, working on a single problem, single model. So for example, GPT-4, you may have heard of this model, trained on, I think like 20 to 30,000 of the biggest GPUs. All of those GPUs, about the energy needed to power a medium-sized city, working for months just to create one of these models. It's truly quite remarkable. And yeah, why was I in the audience, and what was I doing at the time? I was leading up a really cool research project for Google called Falcon. I was the principal scientist working on this platform called Falcon. Falcon was a network of over 50,000 language translators all over the world. You could think about this platform as Uber for language translation. So Google has a new product, maybe like a instruction manual, or sometimes it was source code, and that source code needs to be localized, or that material needs to be localized, needs to be translated into 30 different languages. And at the time, Google Translate was not very good. Probably some of you have experiences, asking Google Translate to say something, and it comes up with something real problematic. And yeah, it was at the time not possible to do translation without humans pretty deep in the loop. And so what we were interested in, though, is for this kind of ecosystem of the 50,000 translators, their managers, the people who create the products, the projects that get fed into this network, can we use machine learning to help? Can we do some of the translations with machine learning? Can we do partial translations with machine learning? Can we use machine learning to understand the characteristics of our translators and maybe the characteristics of our products, and provide better matching to optimize the KPIs? So my goodness, what a fun project to work on. Being by training a computational linguist, like really just felt like a dream come true to be working with Falcon. And then again, like this part of the talk, I want it to be about my failures and the things that I've learned from products, and from the challenges of actually integrating a deep learning technology to a product that has to interact with humans and users. And yeah, we found something kind of frustrating in the Falcon system. The number one factor that impacted translation quality was actually management. We were able to actually discover that about 10 to 15% of the managers were specifically slowing down the translators. And, that might sound surprising, but then, anyone who's been micromanaged understands, right? So it was pretty interesting. And it actually was such a large factor that we weren't really able to even create any machine learning tools to help, because the number 1, 2, and 3 suggestion from the system was to let that 10% of KPI impacting managers go. And that kind of translated into a fairly challenging political situation, right? And then again, being a mathematician, leading my first project right out of college, was not prepared for situations where the math was telling us one thing and the managers wanted to hear a very different thing. So that's just kind of right off the bat before diving into talking about some other interesting projects, saying that to be a good entrepreneur, to be a good creator of a deep learning product, it isn't always about knowing the deep learning and the engineering and the technical details. That is incredible stuff to learn about, but there are so many dimensions of what goes into creating a successful product. Next company. All right. So right after Google, I sort of having seen the administrative slowness and the bureaucracy at larger companies, got really excited about working with startups. And so actually transitioned to functioning as kind of like a head of data science or head of machine learning style role at startup companies. And one of the first ones was this really interesting company called Sensay. Sensay at the time was a social network with, I said like 1 million plus daily active users, but it was really probably more like 2 or 3 million when I was there, but it was at least 1 million. So we're kind of dealing with issues of scale from a product perspective. We're dealing with issues of data privacy, data stewardship. The way Sensay worked is users would message a machine learning system, expressing who they wanted to talk to, what they wanted to talk about, and then the system would kind of scan the network, connect the profile of the incoming user to a person they could talk to, and then it would pop up on your phone like, oh, hey, Stanley, someone has a question about foundation models for biological science. Would you like to chat? And I'm like, heck yeah. And yeah, it was so cool. This network had lots of activity, lots of daily active users, and we were kind of presenting it as almost like a peer-to-peer Wikipedia. So really a lot of fun, cool project, cool data. What were the challenges though? Well, the big challenge was a particular part of the product. We wanted to create digital twins. We had these really rich data sets on each user that had a variety of their conversations with many other users. So we thought this would be a really special data set. It might allow us to kind of capture the voice of the users. This would have been happening in the GPT-1, maybe even pre-GPT-1 era. So kind of what we could do to mimic voices was, somewhat limited. But yeah, we actually were able to cobble together a variation of a convolutional neural network, which is a type of deep learning system that was a predecessor to transformers, and get it pretty accurate. And when I say pretty accurate, we created a system that mostly beat the Turing test. We could actually have you talk to someone you had spoken to before, but swap them out for their digital twin, and the users tended not to know that they were talking to a digital twin. So anyway, it was an engineering success. It was a product success. I actually look back at it in retrospect as one of the best pieces of engineering I had ever done, because it really was a little bit early for trying to target that level of performance. Before GPT-2, I think it was very challenging to pass the Turing test with users. But yeah, the challenge ended up being alignment in the organization. We had one founder who was very bullish on AI and kind of synthetic operations, and one founder who kind of viewed the company Sensay as something that was pushing against the tide of, dehumanized social media. So ended up just kind of not being able to align with the leadership team on the exact way to implement this product. And, again, like this, I think is one of the biggest failure modes for a startup. And as an entrepreneur, it's one to keep in mind, both when you're picking your founders and also when you're presenting yourself to investors. I think most of the best VCs I've worked with or known have said to me that they often just are picking teams. Like they are aware that they're kind of rolling the dice when it comes to companies. Like the very best VCs might just have a 10 to 20% success rate. So they're doing their best to understand the sector, the technology, the opportunities, how things are changing. But all of that is just kind of de-risking the situation. And when it comes to really feeling confident placing a bet, this is what I hear from VCs. They're looking for founders they believe in. They're looking for founders who have a good relationship and that balance each other and that interact well with their teams. And so, once again, like when you're looking at that napkin and kind of thinking about how to pull the pieces together, think too about your mission and your founders and, what kind of people, carry the energy of the project you want to build. So that is Sensay, which is another example. Here is one where I'm not going to actually share the name of the company because I think this perspective will be just a little bit more performance critical. But designed a similar digital twin product for a Y Combinator company that had a really strong team and a really strong single founder. And we were attempting to develop AI-powered chat agents for customer service. And this would have been in around the ChatGPT 1, ChatGPT 2 era. So just starting to see the glimmers of, general intelligence and then, able to tune the system to perform in a particular use case. But the challenge ended up being partnership. We built this machine that if you shoveled in enough data, it could talk to the customers pretty well, at least well enough for like a seed, a Y Combinator's kind of seed stage company. We found that most of the companies we talked to had some real skepticism. All of them had been sold one or two different digital twin customer service agents that didn't quite meet performance. And so there was some real hesitancy to partner. And I believe in this case, the founder didn't have a lot of enterprise experience, and there is some real kind of like, schmoozing that happens to, align a relationship with a large company. So this is like, I think for those of you considering deep learning products or thinking about deep learning products, when you kind of have your mission and the vertical that you want to operate in, like aligned in your head, it can be a really good idea to do kind of like an ecosystem perspective of the data. What data is interesting? Who has that data? What motivations do the holders of the data have to partner? And sometimes like even with everything else lined up without the ability to find and operate partnerships, like there's, a limit to what you can do. So anyway, that was just one example of a more startup focused company. Kira wanted me to talk startups. I wanted to talk about fancy companies to impress you guys, but I understand the startup story is the more important one. And man, do I have next a pretty fun project to talk about that isn't even like traditionally a startup to some degree. Any of you guys remember that COVID pandemic thing? Guess I don't know if we have show of hands or emojis, and obviously I'm just kidding. I think we all remember COVID. And one thing that I remember about COVID is right at the start of the pandemic, the federal government was not aggregating data, if you can believe it. And I won't comment on the decision making that went into that. I think that there might have been some desire to ignore the problem in the early days of the pandemic. So for health leaders, for clinicians, for decision makers, it was actually in the first 6 to 12 months of the pandemic very hard to find aggregated data on case rate and mortality for COVID-19. So something pretty cool happened called the COVID Tracking Project. If you saw a graph of COVID case rates on like MSNBC or CNN during the pandemic, it's quite likely that at the bottom of that graph, it said COVID tracking project. The COVID tracking project was a totally citizen science driven project. It was about 6 to 10 people from different parts of the world. There were some journalists, some data scientists, some clinicians and biotechnicians. All were kind of like, man, this is a bad situation. Like we need to get this data out here. Let's solve the problem. So yeah, I was the first data scientist involved in the project. And at the start of the pandemic, while everyone was sequestered at home, yeah, this like 6 to 10 people just jumped into a Slack, started building data scrapers, and started aggregating data county by county from each county health service. And yeah, it was something I was just so proud of for about a year or two. Most of the data that was informing decision making for COVID came out of this project. The project ended up growing to encompassing thousands of volunteers, and led to some novel research that shed light on some really interesting aspects of the pandemic and the health system more broadly. And you would almost say like this is a project I'm maybe most proud of, a project that did some good, that couldn't have existed without the right people being at the table at the right time. But it's interesting to think about this project, and when it gets to the modes of the failure, in terms of what happened to it. And like once the sort of the government in this country changed, and there started to be some more federally focused data aggregation efforts. The original founders of the COVID tracking project felt a little bit that our job was done, and we could kind of hang up our spurs. And I think I agree with that. I don't have much of a bad feeling about them closing down the project. But at the same time, this led me to become really passionate about decentralized business models, and business models that attempt to connect the dots in non-traditional ways. And in retrospect, I really do think the COVID tracking project could have become something like a Wikipedia for pathogenic data, a sort of common resource that could do this same kind of thing for multiple conditions. So I do think that sometimes, especially when you're in a project and you've been following a certain mission, this would be one thing that from a taking failure and changing it into an advice perspective, I would suggest is that not that it's easy to do, but getting outside of the mission you've been following, sometimes through allies, sometimes through talking to others, can be really positive, because sometimes you see there is a pivot, or there is some way to create or generate value that you hadn't been seeing. So anyway, that is the COVID-19 tracking project. And then I think that I just have one more project, although quite frankly, I like I said, I'm a degenerate builder, so have a bunch of projects I could talk about. And quite frankly, would be really excited to, after I finish this one, to maybe turn it over to questions. Hopefully I've said something interesting that we can talk about further. But this was a pretty interesting company, and this was a company that I think of as having had all the wind at its back. And so its failure is one that I think I learned a whole heck of a lot from. Oro Wellness was a health company that was looking to develop a tool for neurological diagnosis and treatment prescription. We were leveraging a particularly unique large data set that one of the biggest clinical neurological data sets in the world. Our initial testing showed really high quality outputs. So this was a model that we were attempting to tune to help physicians come up with diagnosis and treatment for patients. Also, we were curious if it was something that could be safe enough for patients to talk to, although we were a little bit more hesitant there. And yeah, our initial prototyping looked like so freaking good. The advice quality was really good. I think we were getting something like an 80 to 85% hit rate. And it really seemed like we were going to be able to scale the models up to, I call it 100% safety, but obviously 100% isn't really possible in reality. So really we would be more looking at like 98, 99% hit rate on diagnostic quality. But also have to make sure that 1 or 2% where it's maybe saying things that are incorrect, that those things were not harmful. yeah, it ended up in that case not being able to scale. It's actually like today still a pretty hard problem to integrate generative models into clinical practice, and this is one of the big things I've contributed to at Stanford, for example. But yeah, at the time, we had the data, we had the game plan, and we thought that it was going to scale properly. But I think in retrospect, if we'd really looked hard at the level of performance we needed and the scaling that we were getting, we would have realized it wasn't going to get into the right place for the product. So this is also maybe like one of the biggest points when kind of going from napkin to execution is when you're doing your early development, when you're training your early models and MVPs, make sure you understand the scaling. If you're a machine learning scientist, this is something that you can study, research and figure out. And if you're not, please make sure you have machine learning developers who understand scaling laws and know how to develop a scaling model so that you can really put some granularity into how much data do I have, how much performance are my models giving me, is there enough data to get the model to a place where it has product critical performance. And yeah, I'll tell you, like ever since Oro, the number one thing I do is I build scaling curves, and I try to make sure that the scaling curves point in the right direction. One last thing about this, and actually something that's a rule of thumb that I'll share. This is something that's well known in kind of statistics and social sciences, but it's something called the Pareto principle. My mnemonic for it is that it's the Pareto 80. Pareto principle is the 80-20 principle. So the 80-20 principle says that 80% of phenomena are created or influenced by 20% of the factors. That's a weird one. What did I just say? What do I actually mean there? So let's say you're observing what people say, what people talk about, what topics people bring up. So if you look at every topic that someone brings up in a chat room, then you kind of go, what made them say this topic? What is the factor that led to them saying this topic? And so, for example, like, oh, this guy brought up machine learning. Oh, look, he's a machine learning scientist and he just got a new job. So it's like those two factors, like the person's career and the person's interests, led to the topic being said. So 80% of the phenomena are caused by 20% of the factors. So in this case of like the topics people are saying, that means that most of the things people say, their motivation to say them comes from 20% of all the possible motivations that could exist. So that means like if you're trying to build a model that is going to predict why someone said something, scaling up to 50% of the things people say, 60, 70, 80, you're going to get great results. Like you're going to build a model that's 80% accurate using only 20% of the factors. But as you scale up through 90%, 95%, 100% of the phenomena you're trying to characterize, you don't just double the number of factors that you need to take into account. It's 4 times. You go from needing to take into account 20% of the factors to taking into account 100% of the factors. And yeah, this is a rule of thumb that I think even a non-technical person can kind of keep in mind. And that, again, I'm hoping could be helpful for avoiding some product hurdles. And yeah, I have to say, thank you guys so much for letting me do this little narrative. This sort of talk started as a 20-minute talk that we wanted to expand. And I actually had so much fun just kind of thinking through these projects and trying to distill the kernels of wisdom to share. I hope it kind of went well, and I'm really excited to turn it over to some questions. And yeah, just to kind of close though, please come check out the Youthink community, the Youthink Academy. We offer classes, and so if you're interested in learning about generative AI and some of the ways that it can be applied to products and companies, like check us out. But we kind of do more than just offer these classes, which you can learn about. We really have a community, or at least we're hoping to build a community, and we could quite frankly use y'all's help if you want to take one of our classes. Because Honestly, there's so many classes. It really is a major educational effort, and the demand for people who know this stuff is huge. But the truth is, it's something that's hard to learn from a book because there really aren't patterns for how you use these things. Um, and so the experience of actually building projects with other people and in the open source is just probably the most critical part of being a good user of these things. And so what we're looking to do with our alumni and with our broader community is help projects happen. Connect students to open source projects, help founders find alumni who could help build some of these systems, and have a lot of fun doing it. Because if nothing else, I hope one thing that came through is that there really is a lot of fun to be had in building these projects, even if it's stressful, even if it's scary, even if it can be high pressure. And if you kind of stay rooted in that joy, I think you have the most success. So anyway, thank you so much for letting me talk a little bit about myself, a little bit about the Youthink community. And yeah, if anyone has any questions, I would love to continue the conversation, talk about some other stuff.
Well, Stanley, thank you very much. That was a great talk of a ton of stuff to think about. And at the very end there, you were mentioning open source projects, and many of the people who are in the audience today, they are students from Cal State Fullerton, maybe elsewhere. And I was just thinking that would probably be a good way for them to start getting involved and to start building out their network. And so whenever they do end up going and starting a business, maybe they could find people to partner with. What are some of those open source projects that might be appealing to students or people who are entrepreneurs who are just getting started and thinking about this stuff?
Oh man, gosh, would love to share a bunch of them. Would love to share a bunch of them. First, maybe could tell you guys about. You guys can still see my screen, right?
Yeah.
Here's a fun project. This is actually the project where I got my start in open source. I'm going to tell you guys, I was so nervous. I came from a relatively stuffy academic research background. And so the idea that I could just show up to a meeting and start building something was a little daunting. But I did have a good friend who maybe could describe it as gave me a shove into working on this. DeepChem is a really cool project. The mission is to democratize deep learning for the sciences. And DeepChem, the first science DeepChem worked on was chemistry. The mission that really made me gravitate to DeepChem is it wanted to democratize access to deep learning technology for medicine discovery. Big heck yeah. As you guys may know, pharma companies are not usually eager to investigate cures for things like rare disease. Also, women's health issues drastically under-researched. And so liberating some of the tools that those pharma companies hold is such an admirable mission. So DeepChem definitely attracted me right off the bat. Definitely like a little bit more on the technical side. But yeah, there's so many other pretty cool communities. Hold on. Let me see if I can find this one. One that's a little bit more general to check out would be Eleuther. Eleuther is the biggest OG open source AI research community. They have an incredible Discord too that has some really cool helpers. Here's just a couple examples of their research. So here's a Polyglot, and in Polyglot they're building LLMs and doing NLP in non-English languages. Gosh, isn't that kind of cool? One thing that's kind of interesting is it's believed that in order for a large language model to be able to translate between two languages, you need to have 1% of its training corpora minimum in those languages. So, for example, if ChatGPT-4 has 1% of Croatian data in its training set, it will learn how to translate between Croatian and English. If it is a language that is a bit lower, if maybe it's only 0.001% of the corpus is in that language, it will not learn to translate between those languages. And so there's actually something really interesting that we need to do. We need to take some of these rare languages and make sure that there is enough data for them to be present in models. And again, what a cool project, what a cool example. You know, any of you guys who have rare native languages or even a passion for languages, this is a project you could get involved in. Ooh, what about this one? Alignment mind test. This looks like an AI agent system for Minecraft. So it looks like they're actually taking Minecraft and simulating AI agent systems in Minecraft and then using those to evaluate alignment, right? So that could mean like you take 10 different AI models, attach them to Minecraft characters, and then observe how they interact with each other in the Minecraft world. I mean, come on, how cool is that? Do have to say though, the Eleuther community is one that I've been really proud to be a part of, and I think you'll find everything they're working on to be just about this cool. There really are like so many different open source projects that I almost like would rather maybe hear if the audience has any questions about projects in a specific area. But yeah, 100% think that one of the biggest things you can do to kind of upgrade yourself is to contribute to some open source projects. Maybe we'll just share something on a personal level. I was doing my graduate work at Harvard when I experienced some medical challenges, and have the kind of classical story of dropping out of grad school to go work at Google. And then when I went back to like academic research, I did find that not having the Harvard PhD was somewhat limiting. Obviously, the Google bona fides were helpful, but yeah, actually like found some open source projects out of Stanford and Harvard and built my relationship with those institutions through those projects. And so I really do think that contributing to open source is such an incredible way to promote yourself, to build your network, and yeah, to learn valuable skills.
I've got a question. My name's JJ. And the question is, so you're a startup founder, and let's presume you're not technical, and you're really at square one in exploring what you might do. Maybe you've identified a problem. How would you recommend to use AI to help begin that process?
I'm so sorry. Can you just say the last part of the question? Which process?
Yeah. How would you use AI to help research begin the startup process?
Man, it's a good question, and I definitely think that I mentioned that there are really so many different ways, and so I would almost say if there's a particular area that you find challenging, you can probably find a way to use generative AI to accelerate that. Recently used generative AI in a big hiring process. We were looking for like a particular technical manager at a startup. And even just in writing the job description, in processing some of the applications, we use generative AI. If I was going to share something though, like if I'm talking specifically to a person who's a non-technical founder, I think one of the highest leverage things could be using generative models to get yourself a foot into the way technical contributors communicate. For example, everyone has different document styles and formats for engineering, but myself, coming from the Google ecosystem, when I'm working on a new product, I first write a project requirements document, or a PRD, and then that is shared with all the stakeholders and reviewed. And so we're kind of like sharing the requirements document with the executives. And again, like the requirements document is supposed to just describe what the product is. So for example, if it's a chatbot that's a customer service chatbot, the requirements document goes like, this needs to be a chatbot that runs in the cloud. It needs to be on demand with like this much latency. It has to meet this kind of metric for quality. Literally, it's a list of requirements, and it should be something you can hand to an engineer, and then the engineer can start building it. And then that's kind of like the first step in specifying the requirements of an engineering process. And then the second is a features document, RFC. And so you write the PRD, which is kind of like wish list of what the product should be, what we want it to do. And then the RFC is like the specific enumeration of the things that an engineer has to build. And so when you're dealing with like engineers, a lot of times like they want to see a PRD or they want to see an RFC, and sort of like, there's some work to be done in taking, your thinking as a non-technical founder strategist and then connecting it to that language. You can use generative AI though to just kind of jump over that barrier. So, you can go right now to Claude, write down all of the things that you know about your product and say, hey, Claude, could you please write me a project requirements document? And you'll get something that's a page or two formatted like it should look like. And it might be that you need to go over it and tweak some stuff. But again, it's such an easy way to get your language and your ideas in a format that is understood by a different cohort, a different culture. One last tip I'll give you is have LLMs write your prompts too. So for example, if you ask Claude to say, please write me a prompt that could be used to generate a PRD, please include elements of best practice for creating high quality prompts and technical documents. And then it'll give you like a whole page, and the page will say, hey, you are a technical expert helping write a PRD for a startup founder. Please make your language like this. Please use this kind of words. And yeah, it's like you take that prompt and then it'll have a section where you fill in the details of your particular project, and it'll, write you a very good requirements document. And yeah, like I do have to say, like, happy to take questions on other dimensions of application, but for a non-technical founder, this is a major, I think, way of leveling up your ability to interact with technical people. Like if you can communicate through PRDs and RFCs. So yeah, definitely, I think that would be off the top of my head, first piece of advice.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have any other questions for Stanley? Ryan, you raised your hand.
Yeah, I kind of had more of a broad question about AI. In terms of like use in social media and other like video outlets, is there gonna be a time when you can't really distinguish, if they a certain company like publishes it as AI, or will reality and AI kind of be intertwined where you don't really know what is real and what's like an AI video? Like, how does that work?
I mean, I think that there is almost no one I know thinks that generative video will not surpass the kind of Turing test that you're talking about. Everyone I know is fairly certain that yeah, we will have generative video that fools everybody. And man, scary to think about. Kind of crazy to remember. I think actually at USC at the Annenberg School in like 2016, I was on a panel that was talking about the impact of generative AI on politics. And it's kind of scary because like at that time, AI was almost like a cute kind of cocktail party thing. Like you'd be like, oh, maybe it could do this someday, maybe it could do that someday. And yeah, I almost wish I had that video because really everything we talked about as being possible is either happening or is about to happen. And the direction that this is going to go is pretty staggering, right? Like, I mean, we will be in a place where people's default assumption is that things are not real. Most content will probably not be real. One of the big purposes of like content aggregation and recommendation systems is probably going to be to suggest content that's more likely to be real. I also imagine there's going to be any number of companies and products that orbit around verification, watermarking. I think cryptographic solutions are going to be one of the biggest aspects of this area. It's kind of funny because there was a big joke that after, the big blockchain winter that happened in the crypto space, that everyone went from crypto to AI, and the joke was that it was just kind of, oh, they're just going from crypto to AI. There's no connection. It's just people chasing the shiny thing. But yeah, I actually do think that because of its ability to provide like watermarking and cryptographic verification, that cryptographic primitives for generative AI models and content are going to be a pretty big deal. Just to plug a company that I work with, here's something that's kind of fun. This is called LilyPad, and LilyPad is a decentralized network for AI infrastructure. So this is like a protocol. Think of it as like almost the power grid. If you have an AI app, you just like plug your app into this grid, and in a very decentralized way, it will, generate an image, send it to you or to your app, generate text, send it to you or to your app. And then what's really cool is like, because that automated protocol for running AI infrastructure is blockchain executed, we can actually watermark on chain, like specifically what runtime and what process like led to what video. So no, it is a problem in need of solutions, and I hope that maybe down the road some of the audience members will be launching validation companies, and I can help you guys fundraise.
Yeah, I've also seen Elon Musk talk about it, and I know in terms of, let's say like TikTok, if you post an AI video, they require, well, from what I've seen, the AI videos will say like this video was generated by AI, like in, I guess, the top caption. So I mean, is there like is there laws that say if you're posting, an AI video, you have to have that caption, or is that something specifically like on TikTok that they're doing?
I believe that's something specifically on TikTok. I do not believe, at least in the US, that there are laws around labeling AI content. I wouldn't be surprised if there are jurisdictions where there are laws, and I very much expect there to be a lot of like legislation in this area. I actually was really fun. I took a call with a U.S. senator yesterday who's sort of helping figure out some of the policy. And yeah, what a big moment, what a big kind of conversation to be a part of. I do not believe this is a genie that can be put back in the bottle. I do not think we will be able to figure out what content is AI generated and what content isn't. Even just for example, like in the text to text space, have done a bunch of work on systems to detect generative content, and it's kind of like anytime you create a model that is attempting to classify generative content, it's like you can use that model to generate a training set to beat that model. So I think it's one of these things where it's easier to pick a lock than it is to make a lock, and that's just something we're gonna have to deal with.
Yeah, it definitely seems like there's a lot of extremely useful tools for AI, but there's also like the side where there could be fake news or different videos of just this person dying when they actually didn't die. I mean, I feel like obviously the strengths outweigh like the weaknesses, but I mean there is that kind of fake news outlet, or just you don't know what's real or not, as we were just talking about.
Oh man, I couldn't agree more. And yeah, even just like very passionate myself about journalism, and I'm sort of advising a startup that's doing a decentralized content network for journalists. And the lead journalist we're working with is actually in Lebanon right now. And I probably some of you have been hearing about what's going on in Lebanon this week, and what's been going on in that part of the world recently. But it has been quite fascinating to hear about the role that generative AI is playing in just like that community's attempt to stay informed on what's going on. And there are examples of actors, not even sure who they are, like releasing videos that aren't true, videos and content that's inflammatory. And listen, I don't even know if we did too good a job coping with the impacts of social media itself, and this is going to be that on steroids. So, really grateful for the question, and kind of sorry that I don't have a better answer other than sort of expressing that it is going to be a big challenge. But I do think having these conversations is the only thing we can do. That's really the only way we get to a solution is kind of starting the conversation.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, man.
All right, we are almost out of time. Do we have any other questions? Any quick ones for Stanley?
Hello, hi. My name is Adolfo. Thank you, Stanley, for the information. The question I have is about, in your experience, do you have any recommendation for older adults in terms of communication and companion? And also, you show us the Oro Wellness information, and for health activities such as entertainment or learning. And I'm talking about older adults, Spanish speaking. The Spanish, that's what I'm interested on. So I'm interested on that. So and also to learn and see if there is a market for that. Since we're talking about startups and incubators and stuff like that. That's my question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wonder too, even if it's we're kind of in the early phases of setting it up, but Youthink has a community vertical that's called WeThink, and we just have like a community forum on Discord where people are talking about products and sharing news articles. And if it's okay, maybe we could get that shared with the audience if anyone wants to participate. I would just say though, I love the second part of your question. I'm afraid that I've been out of the sun for too long, so this might shock you, but I'm actually half Cuban, and my grandpa and my father came over actually when my dad was very young, and dealt with a lot of the things that immigrants to this country deal with. And yeah, I actually think there's so much beautiful potential to apply these tools in the context of different communities, both to support those communities, but also to unlock economic value. Not that that's the biggest priority. One kind of fun thing that I've actually been doing in LA with a nonprofit, and maybe this is just kind of a fun thing to share, is there's actually like a real crisis in bilingual education in LA right now. In the LAUSD, children of immigrants who are kind of like going through English as a second language processes are really falling behind. And it's believed to be downstream from the teacher shortage, that teachers are so overwhelmed they just don't have time to be talking to these students, right? And we learn our languages by talking and interacting, right? Like linguistic learning is so emotionally and relationship driven. So it's not I think we first got to figure out how to pay our teachers more and enable them to be present with our students, but as a stopgap, it is totally possible to create a bilingual tutor that you can speak to voice, and that a student can talk to in Spanish, be spoken back to in Spanish and English, and give them some of that conversational practice that they need. And yeah, totally like encourage and applaud efforts to kind of find applications of these in local community context. I think that's really beautiful, man.
Thank you. I appreciate it.